Good morning, everyone. I'm Luiza Savage, editorial director of Washington Post Intelligence, and I'm so glad you're here with us this morning. Welcome to this week's WP Intelligence virtual briefing. If this is your first time joining us, welcome to what I like to think of as our weekly strategic huddle. This is where we step back from the noise of the headlines and focus on the signals that actually matter for leaders like you, whether you're running a business, shaping policy, or navigating global markets. We're building something new here together. It's not traditional media. It's a premium analysis service built for decision makers and shaped by your feedback. So a quick reminder of what your WP Intelligence subscription unlocks. Weekly intelligence reports that are written like high-level cables with actionable insights and recommendations, in-depth interviews with decision makers and insiders, a Friday newsletter to share with your team, a new downloadable graphics library to brief your stakeholders visually and use in presentations, and of course, these live briefings where we pressure test assumptions and connect the dots in real time. And we want this hour to feel like appointment viewing, a rare space where policymakers, executives, and analysts are in one room together thinking out loud. So please send your questions in the chat so we can keep it very interactive. Today, we're continuing our ongoing conversation about trade, geopolitics, investment, and global supply chains. We will be taking a close look at the agreement on trade and investment that was struck between the U.S. and Japan, not only because of the importance of the U.S. Japan economic relationship, but also because there are aspects of this deal that could be instructive for other trading partners that are seeking deals with the United States. And today we have three great minds to walk us through it. First, Josh Rogin is our lead global security analyst at WP Intelligence, and he has recently published a detailed report that you can read on our platform on this very topic. He also led a meeting of our WP Intelligence Global Security Council recently, along with several Washington policymakers and CEOs from Japan to discuss the agreement and what comes next. And he's also published a report on that dinner, which is also available on our platform. We're also very happy to welcome to the discussion Joshua Walker, who is president and CEO of the Japan Society, and he's also a member of the WP Intelligence Global Security Council. Welcome, Joshua.
Thanks for having me.
And we're very, very happy and lucky to be joined from Tokyo, where it is very, very late at night already, by Kazuto Suzuki. He's the director of the Economic Security at the Institute of Geoeconomics at the International House of Japan. Thank you, Suzuki-san, for joining us and staying awake to join our conversation. So
thank you for having
me. Great. Here's how we'll organize our conversation today. We have three parts. We want to first talk about how the U.S.-Japan trade deal came together and what's in it. Second, we'll talk about one of the most uncertain provisions, and that is the investment guarantees by which Japan has pledged to invest some $550 billion in the United States. And there's some confusion and some uncertainty surrounding what that means exactly and what the Trump administration is looking for. And thirdly, as we always do, we'll discuss recommendations in two aspects. One, what other countries can learn from this deal, and how companies in the US and Japan and elsewhere can position themselves around this investment agreement. So I'd like to thank the audience for all the questions that you sent in ahead of the briefing, and we have used them to shape this conversation. And throughout the conversation, I invite you to drop your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll take relevant questions as we go along. We'll also reserve some time toward the end for additional questions. But with so much to cover, I'd like to dive right in. But before we get to the trade agreement, I'd first like to set the scene because we're getting some dramatic news today in Japanese politics. So Josh, can you just help us understand what's happening at this moment? And does Japan have a prime minister?
Thank you, Luiza. Just hours ago in Tokyo, the Japanese ruling Liberal Democratic Party's plans for a transition to the first female prime minister in Japan's modern history were upended when its coalition partner, the party called Komeito, announced its plans to end its 26-year partnership in the coalition with the LDP. What that means is that although Takaichi Sanae, a right-wing politician inside the LDP, won the internal LDP battle and therefore should have been on the road to become Japan's first woman prime minister. Without the Komeito party, the LDP does not have the votes to make it happen. And so they're back to the drawing board. They have to find a new coalition partner or partners, or it's possible that Takaichi may not ascend to the prime ministership after all. And we'll have to wait and see.
Suzuki-san, you're there in Tokyo. What do you think happens next?
Well, it's really hard to tell. This is unprecedented moment. The Japanese usually have the LDP leader as the prime minister, but now the Komeito has lost. So even one partner like Democratic Party of People (DPP), which has the only 27, so it doesn't make up the losses of the Komeito, and to reach the majority. And the other party, Ishin, which also have 30-some seats, which also the Ishin alone does not make up for the majority. So it is up to the opposition to find a unified candidate for the prime minister. If there is, then Takaichi may not be prime minister. But if there isn't, then the party goes the parliament goes to the second round of the voting, and if the first one, even though the person didn't get the majority, will be the prime minister. So at the end of the day, Takaichi is the most likely candidate at this moment, since there is no unified opposition, but it's not certain yet.
Mm-hmm. Joshua, help us understand, why did this coalition fall apart, and what does it mean, if anything, for U.S. Japan relations?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a sign of the times. This is not just about Japan and the domestic horse trading that led to the situation we're in, but it's a right-wing kind of nationalist mood that is out there. One of the reasons that Takaichi was selected by the LDP is that it was thought that she could kind of unify the party, and that by her winning, the LDP could go back to being more of a center-right conservative party and kind of head off the more extreme parties on her far right, the Japanese First, Sanseto, etc. But now we have to go back to the drawing board, and all politics is local. So what this means in the immediate short term is, instead of having a prime minister on October 15th, it's going to be kicked for another week at least, and the horse trading that had been very much intensively internal between the Komeito and LDP ruling parties and the coalition has now ended in an ugly divorce, where one is saying the other unilaterally pulled out after 26 years, and there's not really that many great options, and there is no unified opposition candidate out there right now. So will they be able to make peace? And without the factions inside of the LDP that have traditionally driven the LDP's rule for close to 70 years, all of this is kind of unprecedented, as Suzuki Sensei mentioned. What does it mean for U.S. Japan? Well, you got President Trump that's coming to Asia in a couple of weeks, and he was supposed to stop in Tokyo. If we don't have a prime minister that's able to command the respect, and looks like they're going to be a short-term prime minister, especially an opposition one, going to the topic of today, they could very much ask for a renegotiation. That's not going to make President Trump happy. It's not going to strengthen U.S.-Japan relations. It's only going to expose the weakness of Japan and being rudderless without a leader, which I don't think is good for U.S.-Japan in the future.
Mm-hmm. And Suzuki-san, Josh mentioned conservative politics and populist politics in Japan. Can you help us understand what was the source of friction that brought this coalition apart? Was it ideological or something else?
Well, it's partially ideological, because the Komeito is the party of peace, and they have been as a coalition partner to the LDP. Komeito had identified itself as the sort of the break for the LDP to go more populist, right-wing, hawkish party. So if LDP chose a conservative leader like Takaichi, then Komeito can no longer hold the LDP to the moderate camp. So I think this is an ideological part. And the other aspect is the making a coalition with LDP makes Komeito look bad, because the LDP has been suffering from the scandal of the financial scandal, and LDP has not taken any measures to fix it. So Komeito supporters are all already losing the votes from the ordinary voters because of this bad image of holding a coalition with LDP, who doesn't really care about these the financial scandals.
Okay, well, against that backdrop of uncertainty, let's dive into the U.S. Japan trade deal. Starting with you, Josh, you recently authored an intelligence report on our platform where you told the backstory of what went on in the negotiations between Japan and the Trump White House. Give us a sense of how important this deal is and what did it take to get there?
Right. Well, President Trump and the Japanese signed a memorandum of understanding on the trade deal September 4th after months of tortured negotiations where the Japanese negotiators shuttled back and forth from Tokyo to Washington in often frustrating effort to get both the attention and then the favor of Trump's lead negotiators, Commerce Secretary Lutnick, Treasury Secretary Bessent, and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. And essentially what happened was eventually the Japanese essentially folded on most of the main points and agreed to what Trump wanted. And that's in two parts. One is negotiation of tariffs that allows Trump to say that we have ongoing tariffs with Japan, but at the same time they've reduced their tariff levels related to what they were before, but also an agreement from Japan to have $550 billion of direct investment into the United States. And the specifics of that agreement are ambiguous and intentionally. But what the Trump administration thinks is going to happen is that Japan is going to hand him $550 billion essentially in cash for him to do what he wants with. And what the Japanese think is that they're going to encourage through private and public financing $550 billion of investment in projects, mostly by Japanese banks and companies inside the United States. So there is a big gap between that understanding on the two sides and therefore real questions about implementation. But the headline is that Japan is no longer in the hot seat because at least they struck any deal. Even an unequal deal gets them out of Trump's naughty list and onto the nice list, which is really the whole point of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Suzuki-san, how was this deal received in Tokyo when it was signed?
Well, I think it was, there were a lot of sign of relief because we don't know to what extent Mr. Trump is going to raise up the tariff. If the negotiation didn't happen and there was no memorandum, then there will be the 25% on the automobile, which is killing some of the smaller automobile industries such as Mazda and Subaru. So these companies are now struggling because Mazda and the Subaru has made a big turnout in U.S. market, and without having the local production capacities. So fixing the tariff level at 15% on the automobile and automobile parts was some sort of a relief that they can now think of the fixed rate. And also, I think because of the depreciation of yen, the amount of tariff is not so much hurting the revenues of the Japanese companies because all the revenues raising from United States is just canceled out by the depreciation. So that was another good news. So I think the agreement was a sign of relief.
Staying on this question of automakers, Josh, in your telling of these behind-the-scenes negotiations, there's a moment where bowling balls came into play. Can you tell us what that was all about?
Yes, in the last Oval Office meeting between the Japanese negotiator and President Trump, he had two final demands. One was that Japan raise its commitment from $400 billion to $550 billion. The Japanese just accepted that because it's not really going to happen anyway, so the number maybe doesn't matter specifically. And then his second demand was that Japan stop dropping bowling balls on American cars. And what's funny about that is that Japan has never dropped bowling balls on American cars, but for some reason, Trump got it into his head in the 80s that this was a way that the Japanese government, in his mind, manufactured a reason to say that American cars weren't safe enough to import into Japan. Now, that's not true, but in Trump's mind, it is. So there's actually a clause in the agreement that promises that Japan will stop unusual testing on American automobiles, and that's related to this story of what happened inside the Oval Office. And the takeaway from that is that what amounts to success in the U.S. Japan relationship is, in one sense, based on the reality that all of us are living in, and in another sense, based on the reality that exists only inside Donald Trump's head. And because he's the president of the United States, that reality or that perception can never be ignored. And so we're all forced to find the overlap between the reality that we see with our eyes and the reality in Donald Trump's head. And when it comes to a trade agreement like that, you just have to sort of go with Trump, or he's not going to do it. And that's the conundrum of this going forward, is that, no matter what happens on the ground with the investment or the trade or the tariffs, it's all about Trump's perception, and that perception is a moving target at best.
Well, speaking of perceptions, Joshua, how would you, as someone who's a very close student of the U.S.-Japan relationship, how would you describe the relationship between the U.S. and Japan right now? And why do you think Japan was one of the first countries to actually reach a trade deal?
I mean, the easiest answer is we've never seen better relations between the U.S. and Japan. Now, that might sound strange given what you've just heard, but I think the U.S.-Japan relationship in the last 80 years since the end of World War II has gone much deeper and wider than just between D.C. and Nagatacho, the political capital in Tokyo. And I think in many ways, what's happening under the second Trump administration is kind of a resetting. And I think, as Josh just pointed out, the negotiations with America are less with America, and they're more with Donald Trump. And so I think his perceptions of Japan, separate from the U.S.-Japan, is one thing, but we've never seen the level of interest in Japan, and that has real impact. And so the fact that Toyota is the largest car maker in the world, the fact that Otani is the greatest baseball player of all time, the fact that anime, Japanese food, I could go through a list of things. The question is, in this moment where what used to be seen as soft power is now going very much to hard power, and we're really talking about a trade deal and Japanese government that is trying to adjust from the more Cold War mentality and understanding that, okay, we need to figure out how to balance against China, and U.S. interests are always the same as Japanese interests, figuring out what an America First agenda looks like and what translates for a Japan First agenda. It's having an impact on domestic politics, as we started this conversation by. So while the relationship has never been closer, it doesn't mean that it's the same. And it also doesn't mean that you can kind of take your eye off the ball. You've really got to focus on the future and how we survive the next 3 years under the president, because in America, we know who the president's going to be. We don't know which team is going to come in after the congressional midterms and what that will do. But in Japan, we have no idea who's going to be in charge, and the guardrails that have traditionally guided Japanese policymaking within the LDP are now beginning to come off. So will some of the uncertainty and some of the perception gap that we've heard about begin to impact what has been a very secure, very stable relationship and an island of stability in many ways in a very difficult neighborhood in Japan is to be seen.
Yeah, and you mentioned something that I think I've heard certainly from other trading partners, which is, what relations with the United States look like under America First. How do you accommodate America First? Does that mean your country second or your country first? It's a very interesting question that I think a lot of trading partners are looking at. We have an audience question that I'd like to pose to you, Suzuki-san. How are the different generations in Japan perceiving the new Japan-U.S. relationship? Are Gen Z perceptions different than boomers, for example?
Well, indeed, there is a clear difference between the Gen Z and the boomers. The boomers have some, the remains of the post-war legacy. Japan was struggling to get off the, starting off the, the rebels of the war, and trying to build up the Japanese economy, and then we had enormous economic growth in the 1950s and 60s, and then the boomers have had the experience of going through the bubble economy. So there were good memories of the Japan. There was a sort of a belief that Japan can grow again, and that was with United States. The U.S. Japan relationship is the foundation of the Japanese growth and the Japanese prosperity, and therefore I think the boomers tend to say, hey, let's we keep the Americans in so that we can still light on the defense, and we don't need to spend too much on the foreign policies. At the end of the day, we'll join the American camp. So this is like Joshua said, it's a Cold War mentality. Whereas the Gen Zs, they have not seen the growth for their entire life, and they have been seeing all the deteriorations of the Japan-U.S. relationship. And as Joshua said, the Japan-U.S. relationship at this moment is something very unique, but it's in a comparative term with other countries like U.S. South Korea, U.S. Europe relationship. And I think the Gen Zs regard United States not as the sort of a shining beacon on the hill. It's really sort of equal partners, but not very stable and too much reliable. I think this was a little bit different when the Gen Z people who have the images of Obama or not. I think the before Obama and after Obama makes a big difference of the images of the United States.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into
Could I just add one quick thing to that?
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything Suzuki-san said, but I think we should also just note here the rise of the far-right party Sanseito and the rise of far-right politics and nationalism and populism amongst the youth in Japan. Some people call it Japanese MAGA, but it's not the same as U.S. MAGA. It's something uniquely Japanese, but it's having a huge effect on Japanese politics. And because it's so driven by the young people, I think it's going to have a increasing effect over time that we should pay attention to. And that relates to your earlier question, Luiza, about how the America First agenda is influencing the relationship, because a more nationalist and interest-based American foreign policy is resulting in a more nationalist and interest-based Japanese politics and policy. And that is not a good sign for cooperation and growth in the alliance, in my view. In fact, I think it leads to a situation where Japan ends up forging out more of its own, which may in the end be good for Japan. I don't know, but it's not a sign that the relationship is going to get more robust or closer in the years or decades ahead.
Well, it's interesting. I was just in Toronto this week, and we heard Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney speaking fresh from his meetings at the White House, and he described the relationship as not so much the relationship with the United States that used to exist between the two countries, but now he described it as very transactional, and I think that's what also makes this trade agreement so interesting as well. So if we want to take a closer look now at the $550 billion investment pledge, which was a big part of this transaction, right, to redefine the sort of economic foundation of the relationship. This was one of the most important parts of the agreement, but I think it's worth noting, as you did in your report, Josh, that Japanese investment in the U.S. is already at a record high. So tell us a little bit about what this agreement is comprised of. We've had several audience questions asking what's in this investment agreement.
Right. Well, the way it's set up in the agreement and the way it's going to work in real life, I think, are two completely different things. According to the agreement, $550 billion is going to magically appear out of the Japanese coffers and be placed in the hands of a committee run by Howard Lutnick. And then there'll be another committee where some Japanese officials will have some sort of say. And they'll spend that $550 billion pretty much the way that Howard Lutnick and President Trump wants, with some Japanese input, but not a lot. That's the way the agreement reads. Now, the way it's actually going to happen, according to the Japanese officials and CEOs that I've talked to, is that actually, because Japan doesn't have $550 billion, because they don't have a sovereign wealth fund, and that's 10 times their annual defense budget. So it doesn't make any real sense on its face the way it's written. What's more likely to happen is that the Japanese financial system and Japanese banks, both public and private financing institutions, are going to be leaned on by the government to finance projects to get somewhere near that total. And they're not going to necessarily want to do that because the projects are being chosen by Howard Lutnick are not the projects that Japanese companies would choose if they were working in a free market system. And that's a lot of money, even when it's financed. And a lot of these projects don't seem particularly economically viable, especially for the Japanese firms, because investing in American manufacturing is tough and the labor costs are high. And by the way, the Trump administration is raiding foreign factories and arresting all the foreign workers, which is not it's not exactly putting out a welcome mat. And so when you look at it from the Japanese businessman side, as we did during our dinner, it became very clear that they're not happy about this. They may get leaned on to do some of it, and they'll do as much of it as they have to not get leaned on. But the agreement, the way that the agreement's written, much like a lot of the other agreements, it doesn't really make much sense. So how it plays out will be a subject of some sort of future negotiation, which could go in any number of directions, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Suzuki-san, how is this agreement being read and understood in Tokyo? And do you see that same confusion and difference that Josh is seeing here in Washington?
Yeah, well, I think there is definitely a confusion. It's entirely not clear what kind of project that we are investing in. Mr. Trump keeps saying that it's like it's like a contract money for the baseball player, but it's actually not really the cash that we are bringing in. So there is a lot of confusion with the messages coming from United States and the messages that Mr. Akazawa, the chief negotiator, is giving us to public. So I think one of the explanation by Mr. Akazawa is that we always have some sort of a guardrail that every investment has to be defined by the Japanese law. So the public bank like JBIC, the Japanese Bank of International Corporation, to invest in a certain project. But if it's not, the JBIC law says that the JBIC cannot not finance the project which are not assured as profitable. So all the projects which Mr. Lutnick and Mr. Trump has identified and designated has to prove that there are some profitability and the market value in it. So I think there are always some sort of a veto power in Japan that those unproductive, unprofitable project will not be the subject of the investment. Furthermore, I think there are a lot of minor mistakes in the languages of the memorandums, and at some point, there are language saying that if the project is decided, there is the Japan should pay the to invest in the money not later than 45 days or something like that. And this means that we can invest anytime. Um, so it's a little mistake in the languages, and also I think there are a number of issues that the Japanese businesses are concerned about. Is that if this is going to be invested in the Alaskan LNG project, which is seen widely as an unprofitable, and it is a very uncertain project because it explored the oil, gas field in the wildlife conservation. So if there is a change of the government, then probably if there is a Democrats came into a White House, then this project might not be considered as a legal one. So I think these sort of risks are fully aware in Japan, and Japanese investors has to take those opportunities to to veto if it's necessary in a very uncertain project like Alaskan LNG.
Josh, do you want to add to that Alaskan LNG project? It's something you've written about. Is this likely to come to life given this agreement, or what's your take?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. But the Trump people don't believe that. And, I talked a lot with Senator Dan Sullivan about this. And, he's a big proponent of the project, being from Alaska. And, basically what he said is that this is the perfect project to start this investment deal because, you need steel, some of which can come from Japan. Japan's a natural customer for American LNG. And if you build LNG terminals and pipelines in Alaska, it can get to Asia a lot quicker than from other sources, days quicker, which should provide a lot of cost savings. And when you just hear that argument, that makes a lot of sense. But then if you ask the Japanese, they'll raise a lot of the concerns that Suzuki-san just raised, which is like, is this real? Is this really going to happen? And is this profitable? So this is the perfect example of a test for the trade agreement, because it's a project that would not happen unless the Trump administration really, really pushed it and really put their foot on the neck of the companies and the banks to make it happen. And so our non-economically viable projects, or at least non-economically assured projects, let's say, going to happen now that we have this deal and all of this government intervention in our industrial and energy policy. This will be the test. And if I had to guess right now, I would say no for two reasons that it won't happen. One is because in order for the project to really get the $44 billion worth of financing it needs, they need to have about $20 million of assured, $20 billion rather, 20 million barrels of assured customers, and they're at about half of that right now. So without the customers, they can't really get the financing, and then they can't even start to build it. And once they start to build it, it's going to take several years to build it. So there's just a lot of things that can go wrong, and that's going to come as a disappointment to Senator Dan Sullivan. But I think they're going to push it regardless.
Mm-hmm. And as we mentioned, we put together a meeting of our Global Security Council on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, where we focused on this issue of U.S. Japan relations, and we had a number of Japanese CEOs and some policymakers there. And Josh, you wrote a whole report off of our takeaways from that meeting. Joshua, you were at that dinner, and I wanted to ask you to kind of reflect on what you heard there. And what your key takeaways were from, the conversation, which, as I recall, focused a lot on some of the issues that we've just been discussing now.
No, I think you're right. We've heard a really great presentation of the view from Tokyo and from Washington. Maybe I can reflect the New York view, which I don't think is specific to New York, but it's a very business-focused one. It's pragmatic. It's not about the red team that's in power here in Washington, the Republicans, or the blue team that are out, Democrats, or the different color combinations that could happen in Japan. It's really about a way of doing business. And I think there was a little bit of a concern that the people assembled around that table are real people who know Japan, know the U.S., and when they look at the current way that policymaking is being done, where you throw big numbers out there, which makes a lot of sense to the Trump administration that is winning the day in terms of the news cycle and delivering on promises to be able to put investment and make America great again, but a Japanese that says, wait a minute, we need the details. You can't just put $550 billion out there if we don't have $550 billion sitting in our account. And the only place that they have that is coming from taxpayers and pensions. And that's not the way that Japan does business. And I think as democracies, there are constraints. And it's not just the domestic political constraints. It's the kind of the everyday citizen who says, wait a minute, why are we subsidizing a pipeline to nowhere? And so I think that the feeling that we got both in that dinner in New York, but I think more broadly right now, is to say, okay, U.S.-Japan relations have never been better, and between our peoples and between our companies and our society, we're getting along so well. Then you have President Trump who comes along and imposes tariffs that it's seen as being very deeply unsettling, because America has led the free and open world, whether in the Indo-Pacific or around the world, since the end of World War II. And now Japan is left holding the bag, quite literally, in the case of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership that America forced Japan into and then promptly left. And that wasn't a Trump Trump thing, that was both bipartisan thing. And now we're in a fierce competition with China. And in the midst of that, you have America getting into a fight with India, getting into fights with Europe. And Japan has taken the road of least resistance because that's the way that Japan operates. But now with its own domestic headwinds it has, how is it going to navigate that? And I think Japan is going to rely more heavily on the private sector than ever before, because the government can't afford to do these things, but yet the private sector is pushing back and saying, look, this is not an authoritarian state-run system. We have to do things based on what market profitability. And so as a result, we've got a little bit of a problem here, which is we got to get through the next 3 years. We need to keep President Trump happy. We need to stay out of the target zone of being attacked by the U.S. administration. And yet at the same time, Japanese are hearing from Americans just how divided we are and how there is not a unified approach. And, you know, any deal that's made, if it can't be completed in the next 3 years, then the next administration might cancel it. So that uncertainty is what really scares people in New York and scares business leaders on both sides of the Pacific right now. And I think in some ways, politics is marching to its own drumbeat. You know, Washington is closed right now, the government's not working, and it doesn't seem to have resonated, doesn't seem to even matter to many people in New York or certainly in Tokyo that are watching this with both amusement but also concern, because it has direct impact on them.
For sure. Well, that's a great sort of illustration of the tension that I think a number of trading partners are feeling right now. So I'd like to move now to the topic of what lessons we can draw. And I do want to remind our audience to please send in your questions into the chat so that we have time to get to them. But we do have an audience question that I'd like to throw to you, Josh, in Washington. What's your take on whether this administration's trade policy is stabilizing into something predictable, or do companies need to build compliance strategies that can continuously pivot as part of a new normal?
Right. No, I think we're facing prolonged unpredictability, chaos, and change in our trade policy that will persist as long as this administration is in power. And even the deals that are signed are not finalized, and even the deals that are finalized are not final. And what we're facing now is a never-ending set of negotiations. What the administration has planned for the rest of this year, and especially early next year, for all of those businesses that are planning ahead, is that another round of a different kind of tariffs. So we had the reciprocal tariffs, which are based on emergency powers, which are now being litigated, perhaps by the Supreme Court, maybe not, if the Supreme Court doesn't decide to take up the case. Whether or not those reciprocal tariffs stay in place, the administration is preparing several rounds of new sector-specific tariffs that will affect dozens of countries around the world. These could be on lumber, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, you name it, okay? And those will be rolled out over the course of 2026, in addition to what we call Section 301 tariffs, which are country-specific tariffs, which we've already seen applied in places like Brazil. And those are even more punitive and even more devastating. So there is no calm coming. There is just the storm. That's what you're facing. And you know, I think that it's 100% certain that this will get worse before it gets better. And you know, I think what Joshua said was exactly right. Is that Japan signed an unequal deal, a deal that doesn't even really make sense on its face, just to get out of that storm, to find safe harbor in that storm for the time being. But that doesn't guarantee them a permanent reprieve. It just guarantees them better treatment in the near term compared to, let's say, Korea. You know, the Korean prime minister came to Washington, didn't sign the deal that was offered to him, and days later, the Hyundai factory got raided, and 400 Koreans got arrested and treated horribly. And the Indians had a deal on the table they didn't sign, and then Trump doubled their tariffs, presumably based on their purchase of Russian oil. But we know that's not really true, because he didn't punish any other countries that are buying Russian oil. So this is classic sort of, for a lack of a better word, extortion tactics. You do it the easy way or the hard way. And Japan decided to take the easier route. But the problem with extortion tactics is that once you pay, you have to keep paying. It's not as if it ends. And so Japan is doing better than most. But the lesson is that the chaos will continue.
Suzuki-san,
can I say something about that? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead. Oh no, I just wanted to follow up on what Josh said. yes, I think Japan took a sort of an easier route, but we are not so certain that it's going to last long. I mean, this is we are negotiating with partners who might change the direction in a single moment, or if there is some trigger, then Mr. Trump may just simply say, "I don't like you, therefore you got 50% of tariff," or you are just putting my friend in the court, therefore you got the 50%. Anything can happen. I mean, this is not about the stability, or not about the certainty. I mean, and even though we do have a memorandum, I mean, this is not published actually. We've seen it, but it's not publicly acknowledged that this is a memorandum. This is an agreement. Then we have to abide by it. There
Oh, that
is
was my next question. Is
always
this
an
really
uncertainty.
considered enforceable? Like, what is the sort of legal standing
Yeah.
of this agreement?
Well, actually, there is no legal standing. I mean, the memorandum. I mean, the tariff on the automobile and the reciprocal tariff and the 15% is in the executive order. So this is legal. But the memorandum is not a legal document. I mean, it is a memorandum of understanding. So it's not a legally binding document, and this document is only enforceable until 2029, January 19th, until the end of the Trump administration. And I mean, on top of that, it is unenforceable because of this, where this $550 billion come from. I mean, this is just simply a nonsense. So I think, from a Japanese point of view, this is an agreement to satisfy both are trying to find some sort of a way out from the storm, but it is at the end of the day, some sort of a kabuki that we agreed upon something. We are starting to invest some of the project, and who knows what until 2029 January
Mm.
it will end. So
So that's interesting,
that's
the
the kind
kabuki
of.
theater aspect of it. Well, Joshua, that reminds me, at our dinner, we heard from a senior Republican policymaker who was sort of saying to the businessmen, look, the administration is looking for some directional signals, momentum, maybe not the whole 550 billion. What did you take away from that? And do you think that's really how Japanese businesses should be looking at it?
Yeah, I think that there are actually a lot of friends of Washington in the Trump administration. The former chair of Japan Society, Wilbur Ross, Commerce Secretary, has been very public in saying, look, you got to go directionally with the president. He's the president of the United States. And so whether this is legal or not is not the point. That's currently being played out in the American court system, and there may be constraints that are levied. But at a certain point, Japan has to assume that directionally it's going to have to find ways. And the best way to get around some of this is to go directionally, whether it's actually 550 billion, or you're able to make the world's largest investment in data centers or in semiconductors or in areas that there is alignment between the U.S. and Japan. And I think the point that the senior Republican was making was, hey, when it comes to defense procurement, Japan has a lot more it could do. And so the kind of the post-war pacifism of Japan that has kept it from being a major supplier and a contractor, and whether that's in things like shipbuilding or in missile defenses or other areas, like Mitsubishi Heavy just got a major contract with Australia for submarines. Why couldn't that be an area for U.S.-Japan cooperation? And as there's more tension in the world between the U.S. and, let's say, Europe and India, that actually creates opportunity for Japan and Korea to work more together. The trouble is, going back to the extortion tactics that Josh talked about, you don't want to be on the wrong side. And if the ideas change overnight, and there's internal politics playing out in all of our capitals. Maybe in the Trump administration, it's more personality driven between the Commerce Secretary and the Treasury Secretary and the ambassador in Washington. What does that mean for Japan? And this level of uncertainty is very uncomfortable for Japanese. And businessmen like to know that what they're investing in, they know about partnerships. I think in Japan, it's about long-term relationships. Many Americans get frustrated because in Japan, when you have a meal, you're not really meant to do business at the meal. You're meant to kind of read the room and understand each other. It's the drinking afterwards when you can let your guard down and really strike the deal. It happens very quickly. But if you skip the dinner because you're annoyed at how long it takes takes and the amazing food, and you don't appreciate the pageantry, going back to the kabuki, you miss out on the main deal. And that's beginning to happen a lot right now.
That's really interesting. Well, I think that brings us to what we always love to do, is give recommendations in all our reports. And Josh, you had a number of reports for business leaders in your, another number of recommendations for business leaders in your reports. Do you want to just walk us through a few of those?
Sure. So I think first of all, we have to understand that Japanese businesses are going to face a lot of pressure from both sides to make this trade deal make sense. And everyone knows it doesn't make sense, so they're going to be squeezed. And I think that's sort of what we heard from them at that dinner, is that the best way for them to navigate this is to pretend to be playing along and try to drag it out as long as possible. Or maybe a more productive way of saying that is to get involved early, but don't commit to anything long term, because as we've discussed, these things are going to change a lot. The other thing I think we're finding out a lot about is that the Trump administration's technology policy, especially with regard to China, is changing. And we spent a lot of years in both Republican here in Washington, both Republican and Democratic administrations, trying to corral Japan into and other allies into a strategy of restricting technology exports to China and to reorient technology supply chains out of China, and to basically reduce our shared dependence on China, its market and its technology, and to stop helping the Chinese system advance its technology with our tech and our money. And the Trump administration doesn't seem to be interested in that anymore. In fact, they're going in the opposite direction with deals with NVIDIA and other American companies that actually want to do more business with China. So that leaves Japanese businesses kind of out on a ledge by themselves if they really think that America is going to decouple from China. Well, it's not happening the way that we thought. And the last thing is the defense spending. I mean, we've talked a little bit about it here. This is traditionally and will continue to be really a core positive and element of the U.S. Japan relationship. Japan is in the process of doubling its defense budget over 5 years and expanding its capabilities, and therefore the things that it buys from the United States and its companies in terms of missiles and et cetera. And that's all well and good, but at the same time, the Trump administration, parts of it, I say the Pentagon in particular, is starting to lean on Japan to do a lot more than, in my view, than they're able to do. And this is going to create a tension. And this happens at the same time that the United States military is considering pulling back its deployments, including in Asia, and reducing the priority of overseas deployments and overseas missions for a more homeland security and Western Hemisphere centered strategy. And so, this whole idea of leaning on Japan to do more when it's already doing more, and also pulling back the American commitments and American credibility and reliability security-wise in East Asia, that's going to put ongoing strain on this relationship. So Japanese companies who are involved in this space have to understand that dynamic to navigate it skillfully.
Joshua, do you have any recommendations to add to that list?
Yeah, I mean, those are all great in terms of from a Washington perspective. I think this is where we've got to focus on the short term. But over the long time, don't give up hope and kind of personalize everything. No matter who the prime minister is, no matter who the president is, these two countries, these two economies, these two people need each other. We saw 80 years ago and more what happens when we become decoupled. And that was very ugly. It's something that we all kind of think about in the back of our minds, even if the younger generation doesn't appreciate it. We've invested so much in building the world that we have, even as America focuses on an America First agenda and becomes more focused on its own hemisphere. As we begin to roll that out, if it's done too suddenly, I think there's going to be a lot of trouble there. And so as Trump looks to cut transactional deals, if you go straight to China or Beijing without stopping in Japan along the way, the Japanese are not going to be the type that are going to scream and make a lot of noise, but they're going to pick up that signal very closely, and they're going to start figuring out how they can hedge more significantly. Right now, they don't have a choice. The U.S. is its largest security partner. China is its largest market. Finding a way to square that circle is going to be what all of us are focused on over time. But I actually think some of the greatest innovations in areas that are happening under the radar, happening not in the headlines. And so getting outside of the traditional Tokyo, D.C. access to what's happening with Japanese companies in Texas, what's happening in Alaska, other places. Maybe that pipeline is not going to happen overnight, but there are some easy wins that are out there that I think need to continue. And I think that Japan's manufacturing base is strong. Japanese are craftsmen by training. They build things, and something that America doesn't do anymore. We have complementarity, so don't lose sight of it, even as the road gets tough, even as we hit into more storms. Like, this too shall pass. We've got to have faith in the future.
Mm-hmm. And Suzuki-san, would you like to bring your perspective on any recommendations?
Well, I have some recommendation for the Japanese government and the Japanese companies. First of all, I think we need to do a lot more hedging. I mean, as not as the means to to leave United States or to decouple with China. I think we need to take into account all the risks that is possible, and this uncertainty in the United States and also the untransparency in China are both putting us in a very difficult position. So we maintain the trade relationship with China and the United States, but we also need hedging. And one of the hedging strategy is to expand the defense partnership with Australia, UK, Philippines, and one of the sign is to to have to deal with Australia on sending a frigate to Australia. So that's the one hedging strategy that I recommend for Japan. The second is the create or take a leadership in a middle power coalition. I mean, CPTPP, after the break, the Trump left the TPP, the Japan took a leadership to form the 11 countries, mostly Asian and Pacific countries, which was in TPP negotiation, and Japan saved the collapse of TPP, and now UK joined, even though it's a trans-Pacific partnership, but the UK has not been a Pacific partner, but still, there was an interest for the British to come to Asia to make a coalition with us. So this sort of a middle power coalition will save us to maintain the rule-based international order, rule-based trade, and it gives a certain the leverage in terms of having a bigger coalition, a bigger market among ourselves, so that we can be we can weight ourselves in this heavyweight championship between the United States and China. And finally, I think that even there is a difficulties. I think I agree with Joshua about finding the alignment with the United States. I think there are a lot of issues that Japan and the U.S. can solve together, and in the memorandum of understanding, there are 9 different sectors, including semiconductor, energy, and food security. That is all inclusive for the benefit for both Japan and the United States to bring up the resilience of the supply chain and for the economic security. So I think these are the 3 recommendations that I make for Japan.
Oh, no, that's excellent. Thank you. Well, in all our briefings, we really like to take a moment to talk about what's next. And Josh, you have a new report up. Can you tell us what that's about and what you're doing next, which also involves Japan?
Right. I put out a guide for companies, especially federal contractors, navigating the ongoing shutdown. This shutdown is like no other. It's more drastic, it's more damaging, and it comes after several rounds of cuts in the federal workforce and federal programming, causing a huge gap in not only program staffing, contract staffing, acquisitions, technology and innovation is set to suffer, and all sorts of different programs could face shortfalls when they return, which means hundreds of billions of dollars in contracting is in limbo, and that means thousands of jobs and people are in limbo. So check that one out if you want to figure out how to survive the shutdown. I think it's pretty interesting. And then next week we're going to be looking at the battle over U.S. technology policy, as it relates to China. You may have seen that there's a war now between NVIDIA, which wants to do more business in China, and the China hawks in Washington, who want America to reduce its dependence on technology in China and reduce its technological help for Chinese companies and the Chinese military by extension. And again, trillions of dollars are at stake because these are some of the biggest companies in the world, and half of the administration wants to cooperate with China on technology, and the other half of the administration wants to decouple with China on technology, and they both can't win. And so that's what we're going to delve into in next week's report. Stay tuned.
Mm-hmm. And Joshua, what is next on your to-do list?
I mean, my next to-do list is to go to Japan and figure out how to support the next prime minister and President Trump as U.S. Japan relations continue to go through a rough patch, and also to help people understand that there's a bigger world out there. Again, Japanese investment is the largest, not just in New York City or in most states or in America. It's been like this for a while, and I don't think Americans fully appreciate. We're so focused with our own fighting among ourselves that, all these important things are not being well translated, but we've never seen the level of interest. And so I think going to Japan, taking stock of what's happening there, the dynamics that are playing out in the government, and who the next prime minister is, and whether it's going to be a short-lived prime minister or not, the fact that we've had a succession of kind of very short-term prime ministers makes it difficult for Japan to play the natural role that Suzuki Sensei laid out for us. And I think that in many ways, it's good for the world, for Japan, to be able to continue to be this forward-leaning middle power that is really beloved and has so much soft power. I think that's good for the U.S. And so being able to see the U.S. and Japan work even more successfully and doing things like we're going to continue to see in baseball and food and anime is something that I want to keep the focus on, because while these trade deals matter a lot and hard power here in Washington is all the rage, soft power matters. And I think we need to remember that sometimes people want to escape. And how do they escape? They play Japanese video games. They watch Japanese anime. Like, it's bigger than just our problems in Washington.
For sure. And Suzuki-san, what is next for you?
Well, of course, the next, we'll see, who's going to be our next prime minister, how Ms. Takaichi tried to make a coalition, finding the partnership with an opposition parties. It's all totally unknown, but me as a director of the Institute of Geoeconomics, we are conducting a bigger event and 2 weeks in time. And we are trying to invite Mr. Akazawa as a keynote speaker. I think that he's going to leave the office after the new inauguration of a new prime minister and a new cabinet. But the whole point is that we are trying to engage in explanations of what's going on in the trade issues, and also the economic security issues for the new Minister for Economic Security. This is a legally established ministerial post, so that I think we need to reshuffle and redefine, especially if there are different size of coalitions. Without Komeito, then we need to re-educate the political leadership in Japan, and I think this is a very daunting task, to make sure that the opposition, who doesn't really have the governing experiences, to navigate this very turbulent times.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much. And as for me, next week I'll be joined by our AI and tech analyst, Jason Dean, and we'll be diving into the impacts of artificial intelligence on the economy. And we'll be sharing some insights from a meeting of our intelligence councils on the sidelines of the IMF and World Bank meetings coming up here in Washington. Thank you so much to our audience. A reminder that you can request a platform demo by clicking the link on your screen. And please block your calendar for Fridays at 11 Eastern. That's our regular weekly intelligence briefing slot. And in the meantime, we'll send you a link to a recording of this briefing, as well as a very short post-briefing survey. And we read all your responses and your comments. So please tell us how we're doing and what you'd like us to do differently. We really appreciate your input and your participation. Thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to seeing you next Friday.